The others collapsed awkwardly into their seats. One trial met and overcome, and that was before they had even managed to leave the garden. Even Gio was longing to be back in a Turkish taxi. "Boop, boop," whispered the crazed voice of Requiem from behind the wheel as he thundered along at 30 miles per hour through the quaint French villages. Every now and again, Urasil would surface from beneath Gio's armpit, only to mutter profanities to himself and take shelter once more. The engine screamed as it lifted the car's now considerable weight up the steep hills that lined the route. Yelling to be heard, Freya asked, "How do you know where to go?" "What?" shouted Requiem, taking his eyes off the road. "How do you know where to go?" she repeated sarcastically. "Well, much like I know how to drive a car," he replied. "Good, good. So how does that work again?" chipped in Gio, his cheeks wobbling as they drove over cobbles. The truth was that Requiem didn't want to tell them that he could barely see the car. Just the pedals, steering wheel, and gear stick were alight with energy, all of them glowing yellow with swirls of white, much like the inside of the monolith. When he had to do something, they changed to bright swirling red. Requiem didn't even need to look. He could feel the change. The road in front of him was a blur. Other traffic appeared faint, and the road signs unreadable. He was following a trail of fire on the ground, and avoided cars by feeling the presence of their energy and its occupants, which grew stronger the closer he got to them. As long as he followed the fire trail, he could hear a comforting hum. Whenever he deviated from it, the sound changed to loud shrieks. To his knowledge, no one saw the world like he did, and he wasn't about to divulge his secret. Requiem cobbled together a reply. Watched a documentary on it once. You know what those 4K channels are like. Makes you feel like you're really there. So it's like I've been there before?" Feeling no more confident in Requiem's ability to get them there, they had no choice but to sit tight and ride it out. To them, it appeared that Requiem had learned his driving from the Turkish taxi drivers, as he cut people up, overtook erratically, and took huge risks. Requiem was oblivious to this. As long as he had that comforting hum, and he didn't feel the energy of others too greatly, he knew he was doing fine. They arrived in Versailles within the hour, and Freya, glad to be alive, got distracted by all the boutique shops as they looked for the palace parking. Ooh, we could park there, just in front of that clothes shop," she called, trying to get Requiem's attention. No, how about that restaurant over there?" rebutted Gio. Waving his finger from under Gio's arm, Urasil said, "The palace car park is just around the next corner, far from any shops or eateries, I'm afraid." "Gio," said Freya, "isn't that interesting over to the left there?" "Oh, you're right," said Gio insincerely as he leaned over, squashing Urasil. "I've never seen a herbaceous border like that before. How do they do it?" "I don't know, but I'm sure we could ask around town to find out." "How right you are," replied Gio eagerly. "Just hold the ticket, Freya. We're going to the court of Louis XIV, the Sun King, not to the shopping court," said Requiem, unmoved by their pleas for shopping and restaurants. Somehow, Requiem managed to find the smallest parking space in the whole place, which also happened to be as far away as they could get from the palace. As Requiem got out of the car gingerly, he knocked off what was left of a wing mirror and stretched, relieved no longer to be compacted in such a tiny space with Gio. Come on, he said impatiently. "If we're quick, we may even get to the next door." Urasil slinked out from under Gio's arm and flopped onto the ground. Freya had to bend her legs with her arms to get out, and Gio could only stand in the same hunched gorilla stance that he had been sitting in. Wistfully, Urasil waved over to the palace. "I'm afraid we're going to have to buy tickets, as I think Robbie may have disintegrated mine." With Requiem energetically leading the charge, they negotiated their way unscathed to the ticket stall, through street sellers peddling random goods such as wooden ducks and children's pool toys. "This is a long queue," noted Gio, who had the perfect view as he towered above everyone. "It's strange, you know. There are multiple ticket booths, but only one queue." "That would be the British," Requiem said, standing on tiptoe to see down. "They've got queuing down to a fine art." "If that's the case, we can just make a new queue," said Freya. "A shorter queue at one of the other ticket booths. After all, if they're British, they won't complain." "No, you're right there, but it just isn't polite either. We'll queue. It's not like we're in any rush, are we, Urasil? In fact, why are we here, Urasil?" asked Requiem, turning casually to Urasil with his hands in his pockets. "You'll see," said Urasil with a poker face. "Anyway, no need to queue anymore. I caught a glimpse at a few tickets and voila!" Urasil produced 4 tickets for the palace. Requiem jerked on the spot. "Please don't say voila again, especially when you thrust something into the air. It brings back potent memories of psychotic robots." "Oh, yes, sorry. Anyway, we don't have to do everything the normal way. We are Akatsuki after all. I think we forget that sometimes." Urasil slapped a ticket on Requiem's chest and started to walk towards the courtyard entrance. Requiem, thinking back to how he had got them there, muttered to himself, "If only you knew, my friend, if only you knew." Freya grabbed a ticket and turned to face the sprawling palace. "Good going, Urasil. Now, how do we get in?" "Ah, well, that should be simple. We just look for the entrance," he said as he produced a map of the palace. "You see this route here, the one that takes you to the Hall of Mirrors? We want that section." Clapping his hands, Requiem said enthusiastically, "Great! Let's find the entrance then." The group meandered aimlessly around the exterior of the palace, looking for the entrance, but to no avail. They found plenty of exits, "Do not enter" signs, security guards blocking the way, disabled-only entrances, but nothing they could use. "This is ridiculous," Requiem cried in despair. "This is a tourist attraction, for Pete's sake. It should be easier than this." Freya spotted a sign leading to a woman behind a counter. "Look there, we should ask her." The woman's English was little better than their French, but, eventually, the group managed to gain access to some part of the palace, and all had free headphones giving an audio guide of the rooms. They decided to listen to the guide and take in the sights, their eyes praising the palace with their amazement. All the rooms were indeed opulent and befitted the Sun King, comprising bedrooms so large that the giant 4-poster beds looked lost in them, and rooms with paintings so big they wondered how the walls supported them. They even ended up in a beautiful cathedral with ornate pipe organ and painted ceiling. Finally emerging from the one-way system, a frustrated Urasil said, "How can anyone be expected to find anything in this place? There are seas of school children who knock your knees. The one-way system seems to take you deliberately away from where you want to be. And people blind you with their camera flashes, right, left and centre, even though they're not supposed to have them on." Requiem slowly sauntered over to the group with his headphones on, gently swaying his head. "What are you listening to?" asked Gio curiously. "Beethoven," he said. "I switched the tall black box for my phone. It adds to the ambience." With a sigh, Freya said, "Well, it looks like we've done this part of the palace. Let's go back outside to see if there's another entrance." She was beginning to wonder why they didn't take a plane to Africa like everyone else. Why, instead, did they have to go from Turkey to Africa via France? Of course, using portals was faster, but only if they could find them. With all this walking, Freya was longing for duty-free and lounges. The group wandered around outside for another 30 minutes, retracing their steps, this time in monsoon-like conditions, and ending up equally fruitless and even more annoyed. Despondent, Freya grabbed the map from Urasil. "I'm going to ask the woman we spoke to before where this section is." Moments later, Freya returned, waving the map triumphantly. "OK, it's 3 lefts and 2 rights from her door." With the sun shining once again, and their hopes back up, the group playfully called out the turns in unison and ended up, "In the gardens? We're in the gardens," said a deflated Requiem, his smile waning. "Back we go, I suppose," said Gio, trying to keep everyone's spirits up, and they begrudgingly made their way back to the main courtyard. Dragging her heels, Freya glanced up at a sign they had seen 100 times before, and then slapped Gio on the chest. "Ow! What'd you do that for?" he asked, rubbing it better. "You see that disabled entrance?" "Yeah, we passed it 100 times already. Look next to it." "What, that random cluster of people?" asked Gio. "They're not random. They're just not British. That's some kind of queue." Sure enough, when they walked over to the mass of people, they realised that they were not just randomly hanging around, but were, in fact, making their way through what appeared to be an unsigned entrance. They turned down the headsets this time and managed to avoid the school hordes. After a great deal of aimless wandering, they found themselves, with what appeared to be half the population of France, in the Hall of Mirrors. "Finally," said an exhausted Requiem. "Very special. I really like all the crystal chandeliers. A black elephant detection device, perhaps? Do they clang under the heavy footsteps of one strolling the halls in search of cheese?" As they stood at one end, they could see instantly why this particular section of the palace was so popular. Thanks to his height, Gio could appreciate the great expanse of the hall, which could easily fit several houses. As with Talis's Black Palace, Uracil was transfixed by the paintings on the vaulted ceiling, and no amount of pushing and shoving was going to distract him. By far the greatest attractions were the vast mirrors big enough to drive a van through. These instantly caught Freya's eye, although perhaps not for their historic opulence, as she tidied her hair. "We'll have to come back another day to sightsee, I'm afraid. Right now, we need to find the mirror left of the third statue," said Uracil, snapping out of his analysis of the paintings. Everyone walked behind Gio as he cut a path through all the tourists taking pictures of themselves in the mirrors. Sculptures of people punctuated the spaces between the mirrors on the left and the large floor-to-ceiling windows on the right. Some were being restored and had people busying themselves around them. Thankfully, the statue that Uracil was seeking was being left alone. "Here we are," said Uracil as he stopped the group. "You see that mirror? We need to walk through it." "Oh, why didn't you say that before? That's going to be so easy. We'll just cross the security barriers and walk through a historic mirror with hundreds of people staring at us," said Requiem sarcastically, as he folded his arms in contempt. "How do you know we can simply walk through the mirror anyway, Uracil?" asked Freya. "This hall was, in part, built by powerful Akatsuki of the time. King Louis XIV loved to eat, but they were a little low on refrigerated air freight at the time, so the Akatsuki made portals to different hunting grounds around the world to supply fresh food. Marvellous, don't you think? Much later, Napoleon would learn the secret of the mirrors and send his armies through to make sneak flanking attacks, which is why he did so well." Okay, you didn't have to mention food to get my attention," said Gio, as he tried to shield them from the buffeting crowd. "I think it's time Havoc lived up to his name, don't you?" Havoc popped out at Gio's top. Requiem bent down to eye level with a little white cat and spoke as though he was trying to get a child to take his words seriously. "We need a distraction so we can pass through that mirror. Think you can do it?" With a little meow and a final stroke on the head from Freya, Havoc jumped onto the floor and made his way to the opposite side of the hall, near the door furthest from them. Jumping onto a pot sitting on a table behind the barrier, Havoc meowed at the top of his tiny lungs so that everyone could witness the pot starting to tilt as he leapt onto another historic antique. Each time he leapt, he toppled the artifact, and throngs of people dived to save the priceless items. Hordes more made a beeline to the area so that they could take pictures. It wasn't long until Requiem and his friends were totally alone in their part of the hall. Lifting the rope barrier, Requiem bowed politely to let the others across to the mirror before taking the lead and striding headlong into the mirror himself, only to bounce off it. Rubbing his nose, he turned to Uracil. "Not a word, just make it happen," he said calmly, with eyes like daggers. Uracil walked over to the statue and pressed its toes in a bewildering order. "Try it now," he said, nodding to Requiem. Requiem tried again, only to bounce off a second time, and scowled at Uracil. "Come on, Havoc can't keep them busy forever," whispered Freya impatiently. "Oh, silly me, I forgot to press the pinky one final time. There, that'll do it." "Gio, you can have the honour this time," said Requiem as he moved to one side. Gio took a deep breath and charged at the mirror. It was a good job it worked, as, if it hadn't, a priceless mirror would have been shattered in front of hundreds of witnesses. As it was, Requiem and Uracil quickly followed Gio through. Freya knelt down to call Havoc, who slinked through the crowd's legs unnoticed and leapt into her arms and through the mirror.